listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hi, I'm Anuj Saush, and I lead the European ESG Center and serve as the head of advisory for the conference board. As the behind the scenes orchestrator of the Let's Talk Sustainable Business podcast, I'm really delighted to be chatting with our host, Barbara Mendes-Jorge. In this special season ending episode, we will be reflecting on the past season and looking ahead to what's in store for the next. Barbara, it has been a while since I last was at the show, and assuming the role of the host, which you kindly occupy, so it is great to be back and talk to you. You have been involved with our show with the Let's Talk Sustainable Business for about 2 years now.
Mhm.
So I would like to start off by asking you, uh, what is your reflection on the season which has just gone by?
So, yes, Anu, lovely to see you again. And thank you for playing host again. It makes my job a little bit easier this time around. So, yes, this will be my third year with the conference board and Let's Talk Sustainable Business. And the season that's just gone by followed on from season five, the first one I worked on. Now, season five had a very clear kind of overarching theme of greenwashing and how companies can approach ESG factors, communicating about sustainability. But the latest season, season six, that has just come out, didn't have as much of a theme, but rather explored many different sectors from a sustainability or ESG perspective. So this season, I talked to seven different guests about seven very different topics. I talked about cities and the circular economy with Kruti Munot from GIZ. I talked about how traditional industries can prioritize sustainability with Cara Fulcher, Michelin's Director of Sustainability in North America. With Marco Jansen, a plastics industry expert, we talked about the role that plastics can play in a low carbon society. Mary Brueser from EIT Food talked with me about creating a more sustainable food system. We talked about how companies can integrate nature into business solutions with Sebastian Leape from NatCap. We learnt about e-waste and how we can reduce it with Kenny McGee from Component Sense. And finally, we talked about the role ISO standards can play in boosting sustainability. Mel Blackmore from Blackmore's and Carbonology. And we did talk halfway through the season, Anu, because there was a special crossover episode of Let's Talk Sustainable Business with Let's Talk Global Business. So I teamed up with Sarah Murray to talk about the complexities of ESG reporting with you, Anu, and another conference board representative, Andrew Jones. So yeah, I thought it was very nice to go from a season that had a very clear overarching thing to something a bit more flexible. I think we covered a lot of different topics, and some I knew about, and some were definitely new to me, like e-waste.
Excellent. Wow. I mean, it seems like you covered a good variety of topics. As you said, a flexible theme. And you've already, taken it towards that. You also discovered something new,
Mm.
e-waste. Tell me, this is where I become slightly personal and ask you, which was your favorite moment? What were the conversations which really stood out for you?
I think maybe my favorite conversation was with Cara from Michelin. I think because, firstly, it was so wide ranging. We talked about internal carbon pricing, we talked about biodiversity, how to prioritize the social side of sustainability. So the fact that I could talk about so many different topics with someone from such a well known and inarguably iconic company, but diverse, right? Because it's food and ties. Um, and I didn't know her before the recording, so sometimes I know the guests fairly well. For example, Marco Jansen from Braskem previously, I've worked with him before, but with Cara, we had a brief conversation before recording. So the fact that the conversation was so interesting and she was so open, I really appreciated. But I think I especially appreciated the fact that I could ask her quite frankly about a project where Michelin was accused of unnecessarily clearing thousands of hectares of forest. And I think with that episode in particular, a lot of companies could learn from her response to my questioning and how to respond in general when criticism is leveled at your company from a sustainability perspective, but also in a way to learn how to build trust, avoid greenwashing, and improve your reputation.
Wow. I've of course had the pleasure of knowing Kara through the ESG Center work. and she is wonderful. And I think so. One of the things which we have also embarked on is that the willingness to share openly, and I think that that's really important when we talk about. Be it in conferences, be it in events, or be it in podcasts,
Hmm.
that openness. And I think so. What you're alluding to is the criticism these days is plentiful. We are moving to an environment where we see the whole conversation around sustainability or some aspects of sustainable business. If I was to use the term ESG, some aspects of ESG coming under scrutiny, and of course the politicization of the whole term and the philosophy is also under question. Having said that, actually, you made this connection when you were giving a response about how does a company deal with criticism in a mature manner, in a balanced manner when it comes their way. And maybe I would, taking a step back from actual podcast season, but looking at how can what can companies do effectively to communicate sustainability to a wider audience, given that their interests or their expectations might be very different. What's the if I was to ask you, and what's the right formula, or what's the balanced formula?
I know you said away from podcasting, but I will start saying that definitely check out season 5 of Let's Talk Sustainable Business, where some of these topics are covered. Um, but I think you're hinting at the fact that we're in a different period to where we were previously. This season we started recording it in March 2024, and so many things have changed politically in Europe, the US, and beyond. And it's quite interesting because I've been working in sustainability since 2010. So that was post financial crash, where it felt like a less fashionable topic. Anything related to sustainability felt very linked to cost of something that would be like a nice to do, but we couldn't possibly afford it because we're in a different difficult business environment, etc., etc. And I remember being very young, being an intern, and being asked by a colleague at the time of, well, you're just greenwashing for us, right? Like you're just working on sustainability to make us look good, which was very disheartening. And then things changed. Middle of the 2010s, I saw sustainability become a much more popular and mainstream topic. Companies were saying they were more committed, even if greenwashing became more prevalent. And this might have led to mixed progress, but the corporate and regulatory landscape widely changed in Europe. And so I feel like now we're back in how it was when I first started working in sustainability, where it is now being seen as a slightly controversial topic again, or not being seen, but being framed by certain people. Um, I think my very general message before kind of getting into the specifics of communicating on sustainability would be, if you're a company, keep sustainability and ESG issues at your core. And if they're not there, prioritize them anyway, even if regulations are weakened, because research shows that time and time again, companies with ESG at the core of their business are more profitable. I think people forget that sustainability really is a synonym for resilience. I've done some work this year with people in Ukraine on sustainability, which, as you can imagine, is very humbling. And they've been discussing how sustainability wasn't really seen as a kind of mainstream topic in Ukrainian society, and it now is, and it is becoming a synonym for resilience because of things like them having to rely on generators for when there's energy cuts and things like that. And that really stayed with me because, very simply put, when it comes to resilience, if you're a business, right, and say you're making products from wood, if you don't practice regenerative reforestation, wood is going to become more scarce, more expensive, and the way you operate will be at risk. So, communicating honestly about your progress and making sure that ESG and sustainability are at the core of your business will not only build credibility, protect your reputation, align with regulations, but it will future proof your business model in the long term. I think there's so many examples of sustainability might feel like a costly inconvenience, but it is actually a help to you in your business. And I know I don't need to tell you that. I know. Um, but again, I've just found it interesting to see how the framing that I saw about sustainability when I first started has come back around. Uh, Again, these things work in cycles. In terms of then How to communicate honestly and transparently. I mean, yeah, it's a big question. I think too many companies are too focused on what their competitors are doing, and this is why something like CSRD, as it was, let's see what happens, was trying to level the playing field, right? Because if you're forcing everyone to communicate about sustainability in the same way, um, then no one is putting anyone else at a disadvantage. And I think, you know, it is natural for when things are a bit more unstable for businesses to think we need to retreat and go back to business as usual. Um, but I really do think that if you want to stand out, you have to see beyond that. You have to see the full scope of your stakeholders, and that includes people like regulators and investors who are often not considered when people are communicating about sustainability. So do that stakeholder engagement mapping. Think about your audiences. Think about what you're going to communicate about in sustainability, because you don't need to communicate about absolutely everything in depth. And I think that's what can overwhelm companies a lot of the time. Think about your main business offering, what the main issues are, and focus on those.
That's quite a compelling response, Barbara. And maybe I'm going to pick up on the theme you talked about, resilience. And we did a report last year in January where we actually, for the first time, made this link and tried to actually talk to our members, convey this notion of the re-emphasis on the time has come to decipher what sustainability means for them.
Hmm.
And of course, as part of that, we looked at what role resilience can play and how it actually helps a company reinforce. And you break it down into, the bottom line efficiency. You look into top line growths, and then you look at brand equity. So when you start looking at it in those sophisticated siloed approaches, all of a sudden the business case for every company is going to be different, but makes it much more clearer. Similarly, you talked about regenerative agricultural practices, and of course, that needs a mindset shift for the mainstream businesses in terms of how they are set up to operate in the short term, and that,
Hmm.
that that fine balance between navigating the here and now and looking towards the capability and the muscle for being successful over the long term. But then you also talked about towards the end saying the why, what, and how. Who do we want to communicate with? What do we want to communicate? And how do we best do it? And that's so critical as well. Right. I think we've done quite a lot of reflection, which I love doing, and I think that we can continue this conversation for hours because each response of yours triggers a thought which I can build on. But of course, driving, looking at the rear view mirror is for a long time is not great. I'm going to put my attention to the future. What's next? We are heading into season 7 soon. What can our listeners expect, and what do you have in store for us?
So yeah, we've already started recording episodes for season 7, and the approach is similar to this one. The topics that we're covering, hopefully, TBD with some of them, but it should include sustainable tourism, how sustainability and climate change are covered by the medium, the importance of considering value chains, the role of events like COP, sustainable transport, and human rights, among others. And of course, I'd also like to take this opportunity, as previously, to ask Let's Talk Sustainable Business listeners whether there are any topics they'd like us to cover, to get in touch with us.
Wow, seems we are headed into a really exciting and insightful season ahead. Barbara, one of the other things when you were talking about the speakers you interacted with, which our guests, the podcast guests, one thing which, amongst many other things, you talked about bioplastics, and now, of course, this is something which we have written on. Personally, I've written on in the past, and we are also working on a report which will come out later in the year. Um, but tell me more about bioplastics. I mean, are they for real, and do they say as what they say on the tin?
Glad you asked me this question, Anu, because yes, Marco Jansen, who I interviewed at the time, he worked for Braskem. Now he's working for Avantium, both companies that produce bio-based plastics, among others. Um, I've actually worked quite closely with him in my previous job in a consultancy. They were our clients. And we worked with other organizations creating bio-based products, like bio-based plastics and bio-based chemicals. And I was really glad to talk to him because plastics is something that people have a strong opinion on. You know, you're asking me kind of, are they for real? What can they do? I find that even people who don't work in sustainability or ESG have a very strong opinion about plastics. And I think plastics is often the material that's seen as like, we need to solve this. And if we solve this, kind of, we solve all of sustainability and carbon emissions. I had so many people get stressed out with too much packaging in the supermarket or only trying to buy things made from paper and glass, which I find very interesting because if only it was so simple, you know, the answer with sustainability is it's never that easy. So in the conversation with him, we talked about the role of bio-based plastics, how they're not made from oil, and because I know Marco quite well, and you know, I felt like I could go there, and I wanted to go there. I did ask some kind of tough questions, and the kind of tough questions that people often level at plastic companies of, well, if you're making bio-based plastics from, in Brascom's case, sugarcane is not competing with food. You know, what do you say to people who are concerned about plastic pollution or the carbon emissions coming from plastic, or how plastic recycling, you know, is really not, you know, as advanced as people think they are. And I really appreciated that, you know, Marco said, you know, actually, I do agree that the plastics industry shouldn't ignore civil society or consumer worries. And that was quite refreshing to hear because, you know, not only has he worked in the sector, but he's on a lot of industry associations. So having worked in that sector, I do believe that bio-based plastics are a solution because if you're not making something from oil, that is a benefit. But of course, it comes with recycling issues. Of course, we still use plastic so much, and you know we see the companies who are the big polluters not do enough about it, or even backtrack on goals as well. So it kind of, if you're producing so much plastic, even if some of it comes from bio-based, well, you know, if there's still recycling issues, pollution issues, microplastics, etc., that is more of a problem. But I do believe that bio-based plastics can play a role and are already playing a role. And I think that bio-based as a concept, you know, I've worked on it since 2013, is still not really understood because it's also called like plant based, which people then confused with kind of vegan food or things like that. Um, and it hasn't been scaled up as much for all sorts of reasons. So, um, in short, yes, I think they are something, but there are wider questions to be asked of the plastics industry at large.
Thank you. And I would recommend a report which we worked on. I was one of the co-authors on bioplastics. It's a really nice foundational 101 report which clarifies or seeks to clarify many of the issues you just talked about. Um, Barbara, I'm going to continue on the theme around bio. And you mentioned about nature, biodiversity reporting. At the same time, the whole notion of agriculture. Maybe do you want to pick up on those two themes next and give us some insights, a summary from your conversations?
Sure. So there were two episodes kind of related to those themes. So the first one was with Mary Brueser from EIT Food, who's working, her job specifically is to connect agri food startups with corporates. So, what I really enjoyed about her episode is she talked about so many interesting companies that she's working with, producing things like 3D printed salmon, technologies reducing food waste and optimizing packaging. And I think if you're an investor or company looking to help scale up those technologies, like how to use chemicals from pits and pips in food, how to upcycle brewing byproducts to make crackers, I really recommend listening to that episode. And again, any conversation about collaboration, I always find very interesting, and I'm sure I'm going to come back to that when I talk about other episodes. Then on biodiversity and nature, I think a very practical recommendation I have is if you're a company who's never really communicated about nature related impacts to your business, such as pollution or biodiversity, but you might need to due to regulations or want to because you want to be more transparent, then you should listen to Sebastian Leape from NatCap's episodes because he clearly outlines why nature intelligence should be integrated into business decisions. And we very specifically in part two talk about CSRD, TFND, and other regulations and how businesses can respond to them. So, yeah, those were the conversations around nature and biodiversity and food.
Thank you. Maybe I'm getting a bit ahead of myself and excited for the upcoming Earth Day, which will be as and when the listeners in 2025 Earth Day. We will be launching a report on nature and biodiversity. We have been doing it is a theme which we work on closely, and so we'll be covering some of those aspects which you mentioned in a greater aspect for how businesses can actually meaningfully integrate some of these issues related to nature in their moving away from a site specific approach to more global how can global organization actually embrace policies and strategies to meaningfully integrate nature and biodiversity. Because, and I think that's important to call out because you talked about greenwashing early on, and what we have seen with net zero commitments globally. Many companies, and it was an era where companies were asked to say go out there and make those big ambitious targets, and many companies went out and made those net zero commitments without actually realizing what would it take them to deliver or achieve those ambitions. And similarly, we are seeing a wave of companies committing to regenerate net nature positive strategies or commitments and targets without actually knowing how do we meaningfully address and manage these. It's a real risk. But anyway, that's a conversation for another time. You mentioned something which has been going on for a long time. We've and maybe as part of my when I started my career in the early 2000s, I must have done more than and I say 500 audits for environmental management systems. A lot of I was a trained auditor back then. You also actually have revisited the topic of ISO standards in helping embrace and integrate sustainability. Tell me about that conversation, please.
Sure. So, another kind of practical recommendation really is to listen to my episodes with Mel Blackmore from Blackmore and Carbonology. If you're a company looking into how ISO standards can help you measure and streamline sustainability, those are the ones for you because this is what Mel has specialized in. And especially carbon accounting. Mel created another company, Carbonology, to offer that. But what's good about Blackmore's is they offer support on a range of environmental standards. So we discuss, for example, energy standards, events management standards, and sustainable procurement standards. So the good thing about ISO standards is it is a kind of template and guidance for how to integrate sustainability. You are guided, you're not doing it alone. There is this organization that has very clearly set out kind of what needs to be done and what needs to be measured, and there are organizations like Mel's who can help you get there. But I can link it also to another conversation I had in another episode. So Kruti Munot from GIZ, that's the German government agency for international cooperation. Her episodes focused on cities and circular economy, but one of the conversations we had was about an energy audit that she did. And I thought it was quite interesting because what she was saying with this energy audit was that, classically, she did it with this water utility in Kenya because they wanted to help them save costs. They wanted to help them deliver more water to people. But she said that one thing that was quite crucial was collaborating with the public sector with it to help with financing. And the way that she described it, it was a win-win-win for everyone involved. And again, it goes back to that theme of collaboration with, like with Marie's episodes. I think something that is so crucial for companies communicating about sustainability, but also more widely on, how can we speed up climate action is collaboration. And I think sometimes if you're an employee working for a company or a civil servant working, for government, you can very easily be siloed in that world. And I think the more that you can collaborate between these organizations, the more we can speed up solutions and the more we can speed up climate action. I work a lot with the organization Climate Kick, who might be an upcoming guest in the future season. And they talk a lot about systems change and radical collaboration as a very important way to speed up climate action. And that's what the conversation with Kruti reminded me of. And in that conversation, we also talked similarly about waste management as another topic where it's very obvious that it can help on so many sustainable solutions, but the incentives are needed from government for businesses to be able to do it, et cetera, et cetera. So everyone needs to come together to be able to deliver results. So I think if I have another message for companies is, don't just look for solutions within the corporate world. Talk to people in other sectors, because I think you will learn a lot and find unexpected collaborators and champions.
And maybe I can complement that by saying we've done some work on that, and this whole notion of horizontal and vertical partnerships are critical for the
Hmm.
shift towards, to accelerate the shift towards sustainable ecosystems. And maybe we need to think of it as ecosystems as opposed to linear partnerships and linear chains, which was the traditional way of thinking.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Barbara. Um, are there any other lessons or insights you would like to share with our listeners?
I think one of the biggest lessons for me personally was recording the episodes on e-waste with Kenny McGee from Component Sense, because yeah, I've worked in a lot of different sustainability sectors, but not this one. And his company has been working on buying and selling surplus electronic components, and they've saved over 30 million parts from landfills. And I think on his episodes, again, kind of similar to an upcoming episode in season 7 of, you do realize that there are some sectors who don't prioritize sustainability in the way that you think they do. Kenny is someone who is a pioneer in this area. They've been doing this for longer than you'd think, for how long, tech has been involved in companies. And they even have an electronic waste manifesto and things like that. They so clearly have the solutions to help companies be more sustainable on e-waste. And in that episode, I did a lot of research on kind of what are the stats on e-waste, it's growing, etc., etc. So I think, again, if you're kind of any company, because most companies are going to be using computers and other technology, go and listen to that episode, because I think I think most companies are not doing as much as they could, and I think it's important for companies to familiarize themselves with their topic, with that topic, because I think it's another one, a bit like the waste management that I was talking about, where there are easier wins there than we think to have more of an impact.
Thank you, Barbara, for joining me today for this wrap up episode. I really enjoyed the conversation, so thank you. I hope our listeners also got a sneak preview of what's coming ahead, but at the same time, you know, this is also quite useful for you to go back and to listen to some of the episodes you might have missed. Thank you to our listeners. We'll be back shortly with the next season. With that, I would like to say thank you to Barbara once again and to our listeners, and a thank you from on behalf of all of the Let's Talk Sustainable Business podcast team. Until next time.
Thank you for having me, Anu.
That was Let's Talk Sustainable Business.